All eyes are once again on the state of Georgia with the passage of a new voting bill. Walk us through what's happening in your state right now.
There's a lot of what I consider to be disinformation now about this particular bill, and that's being used to engage in, for lack of a better word, economic blackmail, because there's a political angle to be had. There's a political angle to be had in the disinformation around claiming election fraud. There's an angle to be had around claiming, suppression on this side. And in the lawsuits that we've had with Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight over the last few years, we've done a lot of discovery. And in that, we found that they poll tested voter suppression. They went through focus groups and landed on that as their best way to try to get votes. And it's a very good model. It's a great way to raise money. It's a great way to, get people psychologically attuned to, they're trying to steal your vote. The general human American tendency is being, well, the hell they are, I'm going to go vote. So it's a really good tactical thing to do, even if it's not based on facts on the ground. So we've got people out there making these claims, and it's frustrating because this 98-page bill, there's 5 pages that the right is just, really banging the gong about. There's 5 pages the left is really banging the gong about. There's about 88 pages of just general boring election administration stuff in this bill. It doesn't really move the needle that much. I mean, what's so frustrating, and we saw yesterday that Major League Baseball is moving the All-Star game out of Atlanta because they said this is a voter suppression bill. MLB is based in New York. In New York, you have to have an excuse to get an absentee ballot. They have fewer early voting days. This bill actually expands early voting. That's what makes this so frustrating.
Well, let me ask you about President Biden called it an atrocity and Jim Crow in the 21st century. What's your response to that?
That kind of hyperbole is disgusting and wrong and does nothing but divide Americans. If you look at his own state of Delaware, it's harder to vote in Delaware than it is in Georgia. We have automatic voter registration. We have more days of early voting. We have no excuse absentee. There is only like 3 excuses, I think, listed on theirs. I mean, that's what's so, the hypocrisy and the politics around it is so terrible. It was a lie when President Trump said there was voter fraud. It is a lie to say there's voter suppression coming out of this bill in Georgia.
Do you think some of the language created some unforced errors where people could take some of the contents of this bill and understandably interpret them in a way and then spend them?
Well, yeah, but I mean, as I said before, politicians going to politic. I mean, they're going to take whatever they can and spin it into this. Let me tell you, Stacey Abrams, Fair Fight, Democrat Party of Georgia, Warnock, Ossoff, all of them, the press release was written before we passed anything. The press release said, Georgia passes voter suppression law, insert whatever they pass here. Whatever was passed, they were going to call it voter suppression. We could have said, we're going to pay everybody $5 to vote. They said, no, you got to pay 10, otherwise it's voter suppression. They have to have the issue. They have to have the lawsuits. They have to raise the money. And also, like I said, it's a really great turnout model. It's the opposite turnout model of what President Trump did, telling people your vote was stolen, it didn't count. Psychologically, people say, well, I'm going to stay home then. Whereas if you tell people, like I said earlier, your vote's being suppressed and stolen, well, screw that. I'm going to go show up and vote even more and get all my friends to do it too. It's a good psychological tactic to get people to turn out to vote.
After the election of 2020, it was determined, your state determined that there was no voter fraud. The election was not rigged. If that was the case, why is this bill even necessary?
Well, it's not that there was no voter fraud. It's just there was a small amount of illegal voting like there is in every single election in the history of mankind.
Right.
That were involved. But like I said, a lot of this was election administration, but a lot of this has to do, and this is unfortunate, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, the lies that were told about the election really undermine people's faith. So in a democratic republic, these elected representatives had people screaming at them, you have to do something. So they did something. A lot of the stuff isn't bad. And also, here's the other issue. Georgia went from a very blue state for 100 years to a very red state for like 15 years. And now it's a purple state. So that means we're gonna have really close elections. So we have to have really tight rules to make sure that nobody does try to game the system in any way, because there's always a better mousetrap people try to find. There's a lot of legitimate debate to be had on these things. The problem we run into is I have a governor with a Southern accent. And when you have a Southern accent, there's a stereotype that exists out there that's easily played on. And the President of the United States, President Biden, did that with his calling this Jim Crow and calling this a terrible bill, because this simply is not. Now he's playing politics and being divisive the same way Trump was playing politics and being divisive. And it's terrible. I want, there was, I said it, that somebody made a t-shirt about something I said in the middle of all this, said, let's make elections boring again. And no one's letting us do that. So.
Let me take a couple of examples that I keep hearing about, Gabe, that people complain about this bill because it makes it illegal to give food and water to people waiting in line. You've acknowledged that there are bad optics at play here, but can you explain why this prohibits it? Because to me and to the average person, you might think, why can't you give water to somebody waiting in line for several hours, especially maybe elderly people?
Well, here's the thing. If they're several hours long, let's start from the beginning. Every state in the country has a law saying at a polling location, there's a certain distance out, you can't do any campaigning or electioneering, okay? And we have, in Georgia, it's 150 feet, which isn't that long really. 150 feet, you can probably get maybe 50, 60 people in a line if they're kind of packed together, and in COVID time, it was even further out. So the problem we run into is, how does a poll manager police that? It's easy when people are wearing, vote for shirts and going hand and doing stuff in line. You go, no, you got to stop doing that. What we had in this past election, the last few elections, is people using the food and water thing in places where there were lines, like Fulton County, and getting around the electioneering. Hey, here's some water. Hey, don't forget to get your friends to come out and vote. It's really important. And they wouldn't necessarily wear vote for shirts, but in some cases they wear a Make America Great Again hat, or they wear a BLM shirt, or there's ways that they were really campaigning electioneering. So all this bill does is say, puts a bright line to let the poll managers be able to police it more easily, basically defining the law in such a way that it's easy to say, no, you can't be within 150 feet, knock it off, go back over there. And in New York, again, where MLB is located, in New York State, there's been a law in the books since the 1830s that you cannot give away water, tobacco, meat, or refreshment to anyone in line if it has a dollar or more. So, and that was because of Andrew Jackson and Tammany Hall and all that kind of stuff. So this is not some new thing that exists. But like I said, in New York State, that law has been on the books forever.
Let me ask you about HR 1. You've likened it to setting the other side on fire. Outline your opposition to what this bill is attempting to do and why you don't think it's a good idea.
Well, it's a federal takeover of elections, and one of the really important things we have in the security element of our system for the entire nation is there's 50 states, around 50 different elections, and they have thousands of individual jurisdictions. This is trying to have one size fits all. As an example, one of the things they call for in here, they get rid of voter ID altogether, which takes away an entire level of security that's been held constitutional by the Supreme Court on multiple occasions now. So this steps in and says, we're getting rid of that. So that goes away. So how do you identify who's voting and who's not? It has same-day voter registration, which in some places is great. But we've been accused in this state of having problems with hackable machines and everything. In order to have same-day voter registration, you have to have all of your sign-in machines hooked into the internet, which is a big security issue. I mean, what you have in HR 1 is a bunch of politicians got together and said, what's going to be the best sound bites to build something around? They didn't talk to elections directors. They didn't talk to academics about how these things are going to be done and what the actual implications of them are, and how you do list maintenance. I mean, this gets into the weeds of things that have been worked out for years and doesn't provide anything new or give any additional protections to people. Let me ask this question then. If everybody's praising how good Georgia did in 2020, why do we need the federal government to come in and tell me how to run an election? I don't. They're going to raise costs. They're going to loosen security. They're going to make dirtier voter rolls by passing this law. But I mean, it's not a good law. It's an unnecessary law, and I hope to see it die a death in the United States Senate.